For centuries and across continents, royal women have known hiding the forbidden practices seduction, betrayal, even murder for crown and endless glory. Their information brought down kings and reshaped empires. This will leave you in chills till the end of time. Once you know the secret lives of these royal women, there is no looking back. But you need to watch the rest of this video, and some more shocking truths will shatter all you knew. Subscribe, turn on the bell, and sound your minds in the comments below. From the very first chapters of human history, royal women were both undermined and idolized. In Mesopotamia, Egypt and other Indian subcontinent, these social religious practices were responsible for the life of queens and princesses, as well as consorts. These practices monitored everything: how they were born, brought up to their marriage, public outings and death. While their identities were as varied as the rabble bodies over which they reigned, the ancient and not so ancient worlds in which we find them shared one thing. The royal females of Rabia were both manifestation of divine authority and implements of dynastic perpetuity. The civilization of Mesopotamia, referred to by many as the cradle of civilization, was women-centered, involving priestesses and a hostess. Those with royal status played an important revolutionary role both in the political and spiritual sense. Queens, referred to as entu, or priestesses, were viewed as the line between the people and the gods. Her divine status came with very strict regulations regarding her behavior and her looks. The life of a Mesopotamian queen was extremely ritualized. Personal purity was expected of her, and she had to seclude herself within the palace walls. Women played a dominant role in religious activities, the most famous being temple rites, such as the symbolic, sacred marriage of queen and deity, to secure fertility and prosperity for the domain. This was no mere performance, but an essential aspect of the spiritual life of the kingdom. For these royal women, marriage had little to do with personal agency, but it was a diplomatic tool and the art of alliance-making. Since the time of the kings, royal daughters were married to rulers neighboring their kingdoms to ensure peace treaties or military allies. Their purpose was to give birth to baby boys who'd keep the monarchy going. Fertility itself was a valuable commodity, and the care of royal female bodies was closely monitored, and they ate fertility-boosting foods that were specifically prepared for them. Mesopotamian queens had no status for seclusion, yet they used religious and guild representations to administer effectively. Queens were patrons of the arts and literature, commissioning works that celebrated their reigns and preserved their reputations. The clothing of the queens was also extravagant, using materials such as fine linen, lapis lazuli jewelry, and gold, along with complex hairstyles to demonstrate their position. Their actions were all symbolic, telling those around of how they wore the robe and held the big book by virtue. Egyptian royal ladies were specifically praised in the area of the Nile Valley, where their regal status encompassed a virility divine square and was linked with activities. Egyptian queens were more than simply the wives of pharaohs. They represented living goddesses, harvested the combined magic of Isis, Hathor, and other powerful deities. The fact they were associated with the divine also gave them a unique status, but these high social functions also enabled people to control and constrain women in extraordinary ways. Maintaining the image of Egyptian royal women became so important that cosmetics, perfume, and jewelry could be used as status symbols. Kohl, an eyeliner created from galena, was used not only cosmetically, but also to protect the eyes from the intense sunlight and evil spirits, by emphasizing their appearance indeed divine. Perfumed oils were likewise applied first for ceremonial purposes, then layered with unguents intended to smooth and soften the skin, which would permit more cosmetic products onto the body. Egyptian royalty used marriage both to formalize political and religious alliances. It was not unlike the essentialism of royal blood that drove the practice of pharaohs marrying their sisters or half-sisters to preserve a pure line, which ultimately must have surprised most cultures. The justification for this incestuous tradition itself was religiously supported. The notion that the royal family was descended from gods directly. The queen would produce heirs with all the ritual purity and state ceremonies that might entail. With all the power in the hands of male pharaohs, a few queen enjoyed some degree of rule or queenship grace, like the renowned Hatshepsut. Royal harems were opulent but oppressive. Women were kept under surveillance, and access was severely restricted. Still, some queens made the most of their proximity to the pharaoh by interceding in political affairs and sponsoring religious organizations. Their clothing is similar, but the women of the royal family would wear garments made from colored linen and trimmed with gold and jewels to acknowledge their divine genesis. Religion. A lot in the lives of royal women in the Indian subcontinent, the royal woman state was embedded with religious doctrine and social room dimensions. Princesses and queens observed traditions ranging from Vedic times to the days of later kingdoms, with obeisance marked for women, though encasing tradition within stiff walls. The royalty commonly married in their childhood to form unions between powerful dynasties. Queens and princes were married off as young as 10 or 12 years old, with the purpose of perpetuating your seed through childbirth. This wasn't the history book. This was another twisted, dark world of blood and sex and power seething behind palace walls. See the unseen side of royalty like never before. Subscribe and follow, joining the adventure. Royal women were important because they bared the only offspring a king could hope to have, male heirs, which were indispensable in order to maintain power of the throne. Sati, the ritual where a widow was burnt alive alongside her dead husband on his funeral pyre, is one of the most eye-settingly barbaric practices associated with women at court in ancient India. Though sati was not universal among all the classes, it was widespread amongst the higher castes and royal families. It was the ultimate act of wifely devotion and purity. Whatever its origins or justifications, sati turned into an elaborate ritual among high-caste Hindu women, including queens and royal ladies, often under huge pressure to observe it. And if sati had become a high-turnover business, sadly most who now contributed were in the widow class. In this climate, an effective refusal of the increasingly inflammatory crackpot project would mean either social ostracism, becoming widows, or even worse. This tradition was a reflection of the very patriarchal society that a woman's identity, honor, and station in life were solely linked with the husband. Be that as it may, royal women in India also functioned as patrons of arts and literature, religion. They financed the building of temples and religious festivals so as to mold that social cementing agent in their kingdoms. They were showily dressed and decked with heavily embroidered silk saris, gold ornaments, and complex hairstyling. It dictated every aspect of their daily lives in terms of diet, how they spoke and socialized. The standard status of royal women was defined by the category known as pativrata, a term used to describe devoted wives. This ideal often demanded unswerving loyalty, chastity, and entirely deferential behavior towards the husband, which sometimes came at the expense of liberation for the wife. Meanwhile, others ruled through the offices of regent, or enough to be considered as de facto rulers, on account of having held the ear and sex confidences of a minor king living abroad or insane. The cultures of Mesopotamia, Egypt, and India varied greatly, but the roles of royal women have several common issues. They were the living embodiments of the state's spiritual and political eternity. Their fertility, chastity, and behavior was a public matter, as it affected the welfare of the kingdom directly. Mobility limited for royal women, walls around their worlds. Dressed in unique apparel and decked with jewelry, gifting their high priestesses, but also showing the world just what in society they were. And if they were allowed an education, it was all watched over by the aegis of religion and etiquette in terms of how to please their husband and how to run the household. No personal ambitions or public affairs there. Marriage was an instrument of statecraft, with princesses being married off as part of trade pact between two kingdoms. Whether we loved them or wanted to was frankly a matter of secondary importance. Men can be and have been infertile too, even in ancient times where the pressure to bear a male heir was astronomical, and failure often led to social disgrace, ostracism, or worse, making it plain this is not just relegated to women. Their status was also reflected in death rituals of the women. In other cases, elaborate funerary rites celebrated their roles as mothers and wives. Still others, such as the Hindu practice known as sati in India, highlighted the extent to which women lived under patriarchal norms. Even constricted as they often were, many royal women managed to exert power through these severely limited systems. Their power means that they can influence dynastic policies and cultural trends through their roles as mothers, advisors, and religious figures. Queens of the past were partisans of the art, hiring artists to produce works in celebration of their reigns and storied lives. Priestesses, such as the highly influential Anu in Mesopotamian religion, could hold powerful positions in religious and political institutions. Co-regencies or soul queens, Uganda's kings noted that royal women had greater possibilities to both evade limitations when required, turning norms on their head. Inscribed Hatshepsut said, "Wherever in Nefertiti exceptional skill as political leaders during hieroglyphics, citizens Sheba unlike the course held." In India, regent queens governed kingdoms during minority reigns in the name of their sons, directly owning de facto control, yet required to uphold a social respectable status. Their lives were also doubly marked by the paradox that they became heightened models of divine and royal virtues, yet to a greater or lesser extent circumscribed by strictures that attached to their sex. Limiting by law their range of action and fanning the magic of bitter indeed are the tidings concerning woman. They were venerated for their beauty, purity and fecundity, but their own needs and wishes were often subordinated to the imperative of dynastic continuity. The ways of royal women in ancient times are anything but simple. They were kept behind jewels and then placed on a mighty pedestal. They would have been caught in the liminality of divinity and humanity, duty to people and captivity within castle walls. Their lives were enmeshed with the stuff of statecraft, religion and social order, the very values and halls of power that structured their cultures. By taking a closer look at these practices, we can get an insight into the ancient world's ideas about gender, power and tradition, and how queens in power, despite restrictions, still managed to influence history through their status as dynastic figures, art patrons, and godlike symbols on earth. Their stories reveal that beneath the opulent veneer of royalty are sophisticated human dramas with plots involving abandonment, endurance, and empowerment. From the 5th through the late 15th centuries, medieval Europe was marked by dramatic political change, religious hegemony, and a rigid social hierarchy. Life for royal women, queens, princesses, and noble consorts was a delicate negotiation of privilege and responsibility between luxury and confinement. They existed in a patriarchal system that molded their identities through marital connections and motherhood, as well as their symbolic significance as representatives of integrity within the realms they negotiated. Their existence was awash in ritual and regulation, moderated by both secular decree and ecclesiastical dominion. For better or for worse, the Church had wielded an enormous amount of power when it came to women and sex, and those ideas bled into every aspect of court life. Medieval European royal women were not just decorative figures, they performed crucial diplomatic, administrative, and genealogical functions. Nonetheless, their power was often informal, channeled through webs of kinship and political and court connections, rather than being exerted by direct rule. Life of a royal woman started with a pre-written script. To the power that be, daughters of kings and high nobles were nothing but political assets, bred to a marriage from birth, one that would reinforce bonds between kingdoms or protect borders, or curry favor with the church. The form of education they received was designed for these new roles. Noble women, and even those who were not, were generally expected to become literate, historically sometimes pursued as a linguistic skill which girls learned in addition to English, and was the principal language of record among members of the higher ranks of royalty. They learned the courtly graces, such as bowing to foreign dignitaries and behaving flawlessly at feasts and ceremonies. The skills of needlework, embroidery, and music were not leisure activities. They were as much an act of the culture of importance than they were seen as a display of modest beauty. A royal daughter was trained in qualities like chastity, obedience, and modesty, all designed to make her a suitable candidate for the future king. This work highlights how the Church played a critical role in determining the moral and social formation of these young women. Religious training was of first importance. They were taught that their responsibility and future lay with God, their future husband, and the kingdom. Whether it involved praying, attending mass, worshipping, living out holy days, etc. In medieval Europe, to be a royal woman was for that role in life. One did not choose, almost never. Betrothals could be agreed while the bride was still a child, securing allegiances years before she might be of marriageable age. For princess, a royal wedding was a political contract, not just the personal union of two people. Marriage between the families was often accompanied by dowries and territorial agreements that could shift power within a region as a whole. The wedding took place with grandeur processions, feasts, and religious blessings. The bride's dress was typically supposed to be such a powerful one that this is representing shame and wealth, frequently flashier materials, studded with riches of gold and jewels. The departure from her family of a royal bride in order to live at the court of her husband was the flagrantly visual aspect of transferal her political allegiance. When a queen or princess was betrothed, she was to integrate quickly into her new court life, learn the local language and master the ways of power. Her primary job was to bear legitimate issue, especially male, so that the dynasty would not be in any danger of going extinct. Although fertility has become consolidating subjective dimension, but it became a vital time counterpart. Queens who bore no sons might find themselves relegated to the annulment or political fringes, while segment that gave birth to a succession consolidation of pressure could have sung a profound familiarity within. And courtly existence, to a creative and ambitious woman, the medieval royal court could be a microcosm of political and cultural life, and the queen was its symbolic heart, since she had a mixed role, both ceremonial and practical. In front of the public, she was supposed to act all pious and generous and like she had a holier grace than everyone around her. She held courtly receptions, received visiting dignitaries, and endorsed cultural and religious projects. Queens initiated the practice of intercession on behalf of subjects or relatives by employing their power to obtain favors from the king. The queen's role as mediator and advocate made them key figures in the mesh of court politics. This role was strategically used by many to make alliances and earn loyalty of courtiers. Regent. In times of the king being away at war, on pilgrimage or sickness, the queen could act as a regent managing the affairs of her kingdom. Serving as a regency was meant to be only temporary, but some queens could govern in their own right. They conducted military campaigns, negotiated treaties, or had oversight of government finances. These included Eleanor of Aquitaine, who was one of the most powerful political personages in Europe, and Blanche of Castile, who ruled France in all but name as regent on behalf of her minor son. The medieval church gave strict moral guidance for queens. Virginity was a virtue that was imposed on those before marriage, reinforced by monogamy and chastity after. Any whisper, true or false, could be destroyed by a queen, and it was this rumor that imperiled her political position. Court gossip, often instigated by rival factions, could be used against a royal lady, as Anne Boleyn famously discovered several centuries later, although she did live quite late into the medieval era. Queens were even expected to be the patron of the church as well. They financed the erection of cathedrals, monasteries, and convents, endowed with religious orders. Not only did patronage denote piety, it also served as a cement for the alliance between king and church. Almost all monarchs also kept chapels, to which they nominated private priests and gave alms to the poor and supported hospitals. The queen was an illustration, a fashion symbol of her husband's money and the majesty attached to his crown. Clothing had communication with the language of power. Elaborate dresses of silk, velvet, and brocade etched in gold and silver thread as they showed her position. Crowns, jeweled belts, and ermine or sable capes confirmed the regal majesty. Royal women were even further removed from the highest ranking of noblewomen through sumptuary laws regulating who could wear what fabrics and colors. Purple and deep crimson were strictly royal colors, reflecting divine essence. Gold embroidery was limited only by the whim of royalty. Queens also publicly wore the panoply of monarchy, processions, coronations, and feast days, furthering their role as queens in public performance. They were watched closely for symbolism in each gesture, from their greetings of foreign envoys to even the way they blessed subjects, all with symbolic meaning. In medieval Europe, a royal woman was expected to bear and raise offspring. A male heir would be greeted with much celebration and ceremonies, whereas a daughter was far less enthusiastic, though of course still useful in forming political alliances. Queens were frequently assessed based on the number of offspring they produced, thus ensuring both a succession and leeway in foreign policy through strategic marriages. This was a dangerous time in which to give birth. One of the leading causes of death among royal women was dying in childbirth or in the weeks following. Nonetheless, the demand of siring an heir remained unrelaxed. Certain queens delivered greater than 10 children over their lifetimes, often undermining their own health. Members of the royal family were usually raised by governesses and tutors, but the queen was heavily involved in their early care. Her dedication to public virtue and order is evident in the care she took in instructing her daughters and sons in piety, loyalty, leadership qualities needed to be effective royal consorts or queens. A medieval queen's sway depended on her own faculties, personal relationship to marriage, and the political landscape of the period, while others exercised varying degrees of power, ranging from serving as influential aides who advised their husbands or leading fractions in the court. Still others were mere figureheads, preempted by stronger personalities or inimical political cultures. There is a lot of political maneuvering among the royal women. It was filled with competition, all of which was presented to the queen and would-be dowager queens and other mistresses. For many centuries, influence was exerted through networks of patronage, connections to high lords or churchmen that made sure certain policies got enacted. Nevertheless, royal women were embedded in a hierarchy of gendered power that was arrayed to subordinate them to their male peers. When they were on the wrong side of court opinion, or when they made a hash of their dynastic duties, they could fall as dramatically as they had climbed. Tita Brigitte, which could mean the little Brigitte, medieval queens. Many medieval queens became renowned for their activity of arts, architecture, and even sometimes science. These noble and wealthy women also commissioned illuminated manuscripts, bankrolled troubadours, and helped fund the construction of churches and abbeys. Acts of such nature not only increased their own prestige, but also tended, if anything, to strengthen the cultural and religious unity of their domains. Chronicles and poems remembered queens, but they were inflected with the prejudices of their time. A queen with great piety and charity could be memorialized as the perfect woman, whereas a politically maneuvering one might become associated with scheming and corruption.